All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Black Tide Rising Facebook page, and this is our Sunday night chill stream with 10 days to go on Black Tide Rising Volume 1 on Indiegogo. And it's not going to be a super structured stream, although we are going to be heavily hitting the promote button on this campaign, and we urge everyone to go ahead and get their pre-orders in now. But we'll go ahead and get started. We've got a great lineup here. We've got John Ringo, who most of you already know. We've got Mike Massa's co-author. Brett Smith, our colorist and project manager for the graphic novel creative team. Richard Rosenthal, my business partner and the co-owner of Hound Dog Media. And a special guest we didn't know we would have tonight. We're glad to. It's Tony Weisskopf, the publisher of Bain Books. So, John, if you want to start us off with some of your words of wisdom to the audience there, we'll just kind of roll from there.
Oh, you want me to start? Okay. So I am not really a big graphic novels person, but I'm really looking forward to this. First of all, I've seen the art coming from it, and when you write a book, you have an image in your head of what's going on, and Chuck and Brett and the team really captured that extremely well with the last concert in New York. It all seems fairly calm and normal, and then the chaos just breaks out, and that was captured very well. So I am really looking forward to this, and I want to see it visual. So I'm very heavily into this whole graphic novel thing in this case. So that is sort of where I'm going to start. What's next? Oh, do we have a kitty cat?
Yeah.
A live kitty cat.
Yes. He is not a post-apocalyptic kitty cat. He's not a zombie kitty cat. Not yet. So
He's thinking about it.
If he keeps up being an asshole, then he will be. That's just the way this works. But yeah, no, I'm a comic books fan from way back. When I was a kid, I collected comic books. Not in any kind of serious way. I actually read my comic books, and I remember when they called them comic books and not graphic novels. That's how far back I go, and I'm looking forward to ones that are actually fun to read, and that are not beating me over the head with somebody's idea of I don't know. I mean, I want a freaking story, and I'm looking forward to that. Seeing that in graphic novel comic book form. So, yay to you guys for doing that, for making it happen.
Yeah, and one thing I'll throw in there, since we've already put this out there was an update that was pushed through in the Indiegogo campaign to let all the current backers know. We'll let folks who may not have seen it yet that are thinking about it, is we have actually added another option to the campaign.
Cool.
We've had some interest in this, and it's something that John was cool with doing, and it just seemed like a logical thing to do. So we have added another level to the basic graphic novel, which will give you the cover-sized art print, which is the unlettered Dave Dorman cover art that we were already including with every book. We have an option now where you can get that autographed by John for a nominal extra fee. And for the people who have already ordered a basic graphic novel and might want that, don't worry, guys, we've got you covered too. What we have there is we added an upgrade option on that. The reward level that John's going to be signing there with this art print is $60, and for the folks that have already ordered, we added a $35 upgrade. So you're paying the same price for that, and you don't have to do anything other than just add that additional upgrade to your, just go ahead and do that as another transaction, and we'll have that information there. We'll make sure that it gets that you get your art print signed by John and get it sent to you along with your basic book.
And
we've
done signed editions of books with John, and every now and then you'll get a little bit of the author's blood in there. So I'm just, no promises. We can't. I don't think Indiegogo will let us actually put that as a stretch goal, but
that might be a concern they have, I'm sure.
If you want it signed in blood, I'll sign it in blood. All right. The last time we did that, signing over and over again to go into the books, One of the things about it was the sheets that I got were cut in such a way that it was nearly impossible to separate them. But at a certain point, I started writing, "Help! Help! I'm trapped in the basement." But I'm down here just signing these things one after another, and I'm just going nuts doing this, right? So I just start writing notes to people, "Help! Please send help! Oh God, the guards are coming!"
And I want you to know we did bind those into books. I mean, oh yeah, we didn't take those out.
Somebody came up to me at a convention. It was Bernardo Della Paz. He said, "I bought one of those, and there's a number written on it." And I wondered what that number was about. And I was like, "Oh, that was just how I was keeping count," because I was like trying to figure out how many of these things I have to write. So I would like write a number up to 100. Well, there's 100, you know. And you sign 1,000 of these things, and your hand cramps, and you're like, "Oh, this will never end." Anyway.
Yeah, and the other authors were feeling this too, but they didn't express this until John sort of took the lead and was the voice for his generation. So we got the message.
And I'll just jump in really quick and say that we are over $35,000 now. Thank you guys. Nice. That puts us at just about, we're about to hit 82% of the goal. We're rocking along here, and it's we're getting there, and hey, just keep up the great work. One other thing with reward levels that I will mention, and we clear this for Brett just because we want to make sure that we're not overloading. Fearless Santa Cruz, our outstanding interior artist, he's going to be doing a lot of drawing from your reference photos from you folks who have chosen a reward level that actually gets you drawn in the book. Our two most popular have been the speaking roles, which is basically the movie set equivalent of you getting to show up in a scene with a speaking line. We sold out of those a little while back, and we sold out of our character cameo, which is being drawn full face into the book and being very distinctive in there. And we're going to go ahead and add one more of each of those to there. So if you know anybody who wants to do that, then I hope they're watching, and if they're not watching and you know who they are, let them know, because those went pretty quickly, and we're going to go ahead and make that opportunity open for a very limited time to a couple more people.
Brett, can I ask you a question? And this is just throwing this out here because I know nothing about your job and I know nothing about Indiegogo. What about a guaranteed headshot?
Like a headshot wound?
We actually do have that too. We have these
that gets shot right in the foot.
Well, we do have the zombie cannon fodder bundle, and there's actually one of those still left, and that's exactly what John's describing right there.
Yeah, but can we do like an extra 35 for $50 if it's you're actually guaranteed to be shot in the head?
It's there. It's just a lot more than 35.
Some of my fans, we could honestly get $500 out of that.
Oh, that's that particular reward level is actually $850, and that's yeah. In fact, our favorite grifting YouTube lawyer, Nick Ricada, who Brett and Chuck were on with a few weeks ago, great, wonderful guy, has done a tremendous amount of work with us, getting the word out and letting people know we're here. He actually bought one of those because he's a very big supporter of independent comics and graphic novels, and he has a goal of getting killed in as many graphic novels as possible. So we're glad that we were able to help him in that effort.
Yeah, I think this will be his third.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So and the other thing is I was going to mention is on a past campaign that I'm fulfilling right now, we had kind of the same thing where you can have a walk-on role or a speaking role, and we had one of those was bought by somebody for someone. So the person that bought the perk bought it for his girlfriend. So we ended up putting her in. So if somebody wants to buy that for somebody, you're certainly welcome to. And all we require is just some reference material of the person that you would want to have a walk-on role in the book. So usually just like a couple headshots is all we really need for journalists to do that, and you'd be putting somebody into the pages of the graphic novel.
Absolutely, and one of the things I'll mention there is one of our purchasers of the $1,000 tier, someone who's been very, very supportive of this campaign. We really, really appreciate him. He's actually going to wind up being a significant supporting character in there. So I'm going to have to go talk to him later and say, hey, who would you like us to draw in this place? Because we've kind of already got you in there.
Cool. Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, and it's not appropriate to get it for your ex.
No, I think we should be open to that. You know.
Well, if you want to get rid of her, it might be.
Yeah, I suppose you might want to seek competent legal counsel in your state or locality just to make sure you're clear on that. You're probably okay, but yeah, you might just want to make extra sure on that.
And we'll probably we'll drop some kind of indemnification for Hound Dog Media and Dane.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Yeah. and Color Fusion and me. So.
A big thing with the COVID that's going around with the Rona is you're not supposed to touch your face. So people might be wondering why I keep rubbing my jaw. The reason I'm rubbing my jaw is that I have to go to the dentist on Wednesday to have a permanent crown put on, and the temporary crown is having some issues. So I wasn't too sure I was even going to be here because about noon I was rolling around on the ground, writhing and screaming in agony. So that brings up the whole subject of post-apocalyptic dentistry. As Tony mentioned earlier, if you take a look at skeletons from the Paleolithic and the Neolithic, et cetera, and even the Middle Ages, you find that a lot of people just died from abscesses. And even Neanderthals had dentistry. Neanderthals had ways to extract teeth and even to drill teeth. Which they would use little stone tools to do dentistry, which you can imagine how much fun that would be. But I'm thinking about doing a short story with I'm thinking about doing a short story that involves a guy who never was a dentist before the apocalypse, but he decided he was going to become a dentist just because he's a sadist. And the title of it will be He'll Be a Dentist, or You'll Be a Dentist, because it is my favorite scene from possibly any movie, but definitely my favorite scene from Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah, absolutely. Same here. It's the song, and the choreography as he pulls up on the bike and he says, it's the chorus, which is, "You'll be a dentist, you'll have the." What is it? The talent for causing things pain.
Yeah.
And then he punches somebody. Like he punches somebody like on the way in the door. That is the best character. I saw that in the theater back in that's probably late 80s. Ironically enough, Rick Moranis gets punched out in New York City the other day.
Oh man.
Yeah, that's just. 2020 is like gone to 11 when Rick Moranis gets sucker punched on the street.
In the same month that he appears on TV again in that Mint commercial.
Yeah, right.
I think that has more to do with New York City than it does with the year. But yeah, point taken.
It's crazy. It's great. Bill Burr said that just means New York City is back. I don't know about that.
It's back to Escape from New York days.
Right. It's kind of back to the late 70s, 80s. It's going to become sort of like the backdrop of the French Connection again.
Well, Joel back then wrote a song called Miami 2017. And Miami 2017 is actually the basis for the last concert in New York. That is what I based the last concert in New York on. And I was listening to it the other day and I went, wow, he only missed by 3 years. But it's got some fascinating lyrics in it because he's talking about we're all here in Miami. And if you take a look at what's going on in New York right now, the hottest real estate market in the United States right now is South Florida. And my niece and her husband and her kid just moved to Boca Raton. everybody's moving from New York to Miami, especially with Rona and with everybody realizing that, hey, everyone doesn't have to pack into a skyscraper in New York to do their jobs. Big Books had, way back in the 90s, Jim Bain went to the concept of distributing all of the work with Bain Books. So Bain has been way in the forefront. Well, they were in the forefront of ebooks, for one thing. And they've also been in the forefront of distributed business. And for, Tony, can I talk about, like, Tony lives in Georgia. The office is Tony is the publisher. She's the boss. She lives in Georgia. The office is in North Carolina. The copy editors are scattered all over. The artists are scattered all over. You don't have to have everybody in one great big skyscraper. And now all sorts of people are figuring that out and realizing, hey, I do not have to live in this hellhole. I can live someplace decent.
Yeah, you can. I mean, it's which was one of the reasons why we had almost no hiccup with with the strictures that the various states imposed with the Rona, because we were already there. We were already in a position where people could just do their jobs. I think we're going to see a sea change. I think we're going to see a sea change in education. I think we're going to see a change in the way that business gets done. There's going to be good things and bad things. I think the pendulum is going to go back a little bit more towards offices again, because people need human contact, and there's a reason why we have offices. And it is mostly about that contact, but it's also about efficiency. You can get things done in an office that you just can't get done in one of these kinds of meetings. But a lot can get done in this way. So, I think it's going to be interesting to see how the Black Tide Rising universe, as it starts to rebuild, how it starts working on these challenges. And and I know this is something that Mike has thought of in his his real life job. So, where do you think this is going to go?
So that's a pretty broad question, Tony. I think about that every day, both professionally and personally. I think you're right that the impetus and the return to some form of dense urban life is going to continue for a number of factors. One of which is that there's a certain amount of, even super high rents and utility costs notwithstanding, there are some efficiencies that can be found when you squeeze people together. And there really is no substitute for human contact, even in a business sense, even with all the advanced technology and telepresence and having anybody at your fingertips, digitally speaking. But there have been a large number of people, surprisingly large, who have made substantial investments and relocated their businesses, their business presence, and their fortunes out of what they think of now as a more risky urban environment. And I'm thinking of the gentleman in New York, who was a multi-billionaire hedge fund, in northern New Jersey with offices in New York. And he relocated not just his household, but his entire business, to include the business units, to Florida, as John pointed out. And he paid cash for a really big estate and paid cash for a big office building. And as a result of his departure, there was a perceptible blip downwards in the New Jersey and New York tax revenue on a revenue adjusted basis for both the quarter and the year.
Wow.
And
one guy.
And mind you, he was a billionaire and he had a big hedge fund business. So that's a tax revenue, but still, that's one person's decision. So I agree. I also agree with folks that say it won't be the way that it was, but we're not going to see cities turn into sort of a howling wilderness where we can tear down the streets in a fancy Ford Mustang and hunt deer from the window with an AR while chasing down lions. We're not quite that far yet. Although that would make for a very lurid comic panel, for sure.
There have been a number of businesses, especially in New York, that have moved to what are generally called red states. There was a very large one, I can't remember the name of it, but it was prior to the Rona, that moved almost all of their business to Nashville. And it was a multi-billion-dollar financial firm. What will be interesting for me is if the publishers ever move out. And the last people that you will see leave New York will be places like Random House. But City Core used to have all of its bases, its primary headquarters and everything was in New York. They moved to Omaha decades ago. Mike, you have to unmute. Mike, you have to.
Sorry about that, Mike. Yeah, I had you muted just because I wanted to try to avoid the cross echo on there, and then I accidentally removed you.
I had a question for John, and that was, or maybe Tony knows, when the businesses began when the publishing houses began concentrating in New York City, was that because there was actual printing happening in the boroughs? Were the offices close to the actual place of manufacture originally?
Yeah, the printing used to be done in New York. They used to have printers there. I know with who was the one that did the first paperbacks? Pocketbooks, right?
Yeah, Pocketbooks and Penguin.
Pocketbooks and Penguin had their printers were actually in the New York City area. So it used to be that like they'd have a big building and all the editors and everything would be in the top of the building, and the printing would be in the basement, like New York Times used to do. So that was how it was then. Now it's like the printing is done in Canada, and you can have your copy editors anywhere. Everything can go around electronically. Everybody's still concentrated on 52nd Avenue. 52nd, right?
So
6th Avenue and yeah.
Yeah.
So I wonder then if publishing isn't ripe for the same kind of dislocation that the financial services folks have experienced in the last decade. One of the I won't say secrets, but one of the little understood and appreciated features of let's call it Wall Street, although there's very few banks, only two are left on Wall Street now, Deutsche Bank and Bank of Mellon, New York, is that all the transactions that go through your bank are terminated or reconciled at the end of every 24-hour billing cycle outside the United States, mostly in India, in fact, even for big international banks, because that's where there's relatively cheap, relatively high educated, and fairly secure in terms of internet connectivity, digital pipes. And so I don't think that that's going to mean that we're going to see publishers move their staffs to India, but it does point to the fact you don't need to have much more than a storefront on 52nd Avenue or wherever the, not wouldn't be Avenue, be Street, 52nd, probably East 52nd, right, Tony?
Well, 52nd Street, 6th Avenue, Rockefeller Center. There's a bunch of publishers there. But they're all over the place in New York. But I think New York is, because big publishing is a multinational thing. I think New York is going to be still a base for it, just because New York is so easy to get to from other places. And it's a place that people want to go to for the culture, and so long as the rich people of New York are protected, that will continue to be the case.
One of the things
I think the home offices will stay there for sure.
Yeah,
because it looks better in the beginning of a book to say you've got a home office in New York, Paris, than it does to say it's in,
Well, Baby's still got an office in New York just to have an office in New York.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, we do.
On the subject of black tide, someone, and I can't remember who it was, had suggested a short story about bringing back the internet. And I said, forget it. For one thing, I don't think the person understood what the internet means. Because, this is probably going through 3 different servers in 3 different countries. And a lot of them are probably in Iceland. And the internet is just a gazillion computers, which is what a server is. It's a computer scattered all over the world. And the little bits that get separated go to all sorts of different places in all sorts of different ways. So bringing back the internet in the way that he was talking about, I didn't find likely. And then I was talking to a person who's an expert in satellite technology, and they said, oh, no, it wouldn't be particularly difficult. This kind of internet would be really, really tough. But 1980s internet, early 1990s internet, you get these satellites. Because every satellite that's up there is in and of itself a server as well. So you literally just use the satellites that are still going to be in orbit as your internet for what remains of the society that is there. So what we were talking about was, how do you do things in a distributed manner? And in a post-apocalyptic world, it's going to be very hard to concentrate everyone. It's just a transportation issue. And so you have to figure out how to do things distributed. I hadn't thought about it, but if you go back and you look even at Black Tide, they were working in a very distributed manner. The classic example was the situation with the two kids who the girl got pregnant. And how did the girl get pregnant? Because they insisted they did not have sex. And so the people in the CDC, who are the only, at the time, doctors they've got left, are going over the stuff and trying to figure out what's actually going on with that. That is exactly what we're dealing with COVID. You've got telemedicine now. What they were doing was telemedicine. Yeah. So it's very likely in the Black Tide universe that people who get connected are going to be doing things in very distributed ways. And I hadn't really realized that up until I talked to this person who was a satellite specialist. Anyway, Mike started to have something to input on that.
Well, John, so I just turned in my 5th Black Tide Rising short story this is for the 3rd anthology coming up, We Shall Rise. And in it, one of the reasons the story worked is you had included in, I want to say it was Islands of Rage and Hope. Am I getting it right? Book 4? Anyhow, one of the things that happens is the first long haul passenger aircraft service is, in a military sense, is reestablished. One of the modified 737s called a Poseidon P-8A is flying a circuit from Guantanamo to a couple of places in Florida, and I think it's landing in one of the fields in the capital region, and likely other stops as well as cities get cleared. And so I used that plot point that John had established in the mainline novels to make it possible for people to get from one city to another. And so moving characters like that, though helpful, didn't overcome the distributed nature of the problem solving that had to happen. And one of the interesting things is that even though that distributed sort of a headshed communications ability exists, it doesn't trickle down to the rank and file. So there's still a whole lot of initiative happening at the junior soldier, NCO, and civilian volunteer level, because there is no internet yet established in canon, so I couldn't use that. So I was smiling as I was thinking of that scene where Faith and her Marines line up and they do a foreign object damage walk down on the airstrip. I think it's in Guantanamo, right? And all the Marines are like, seriously, elite infantry to pick up garbage? And like someone picks up and waves a vulcanized hand.
That was in Jacksonville, if I recall.
I'm sorry, Jacksonville, you're right.
Yeah. And I did that specifically because you were an officer, I was enlisted, and doing things like that, having what they had been through, and then suddenly it's like, and now you got to do a 5 walk down. And it's like, well, we're back in the fucking Marine Corps now, because this is exactly what it's like, right? Yesterday we were killing friggin' zombies, now we got to do a fucking 5 walk down, right?
I'll tell you what. So when I was a passenger on board USS Carl Vinson, CVN 72, I was an officer, and I was still, I won't say Shanghai, but I was voluntold to participate in flight deck fog walkdowns as a matter of course. Although I was a shipwrighter and a passenger, I was still out there shuffling my feet, looking for itsy bitsy teeny tiny specks of loose non-skid or whatever you could find.
All you need to find is a washer. That's it.
Well, when I was in the 82nd, back in the 80s, you had 3 cycles. You had training cycle, you had deployment cycle, which is when you were on the various division reaction force, and then you had sports cycle. And during sports cycle, you just did all sorts of sport. Because I was primarily a driver, I drove buses an awful lot. But if you were grunt infantry and didn't have a driver's license, didn't have a military driver's license, what you mostly did was pick up trash. In retrospect, it was a horrible use of them. They should have just been training during that time. But that is part of the life of being a soldier. Is they send you out there to pick up trash, and it is one of those things that the 101st during one of their deployments, a 101st battalion during one of their deployments to Iraq had a 100% re-enlistment rate. Everyone in the battalion who was up for re-enlisted during a combat deployment that was during one of the very hottest periods for the 101st in Iraq. We currently have something like a 26, about an 82%, sorry, it was the reverse. They have like an 82, 84% re-enlistment rate, which is fairly high.
Yeah.
But what most people get out for is not because people are shooting at them or they're getting shot or they're getting blown up. It's because they have to pick up trash. That's why people get out of the Army.
Well, I think there's a certain amount of, if you get to do the thing that you're trained to do, no matter what that thing is, you're happy that you get to do it. And that's not a bad thing. I don't know if any of you guys have read Heinlein's Starman Jones, which is not one. Yeah, it's not one of his best juveniles, but it's not bad. And it sort of makes the point that humans are made to be under stress, right? I mean, what we do and when we are at our best is when we are stressed. And I think that's one of the points that Black Tide Rising Universe makes, is that for the people who make it, this is fun. It's fun. You're getting to do things that humans are supposed to do.
Well, one aspect of post-apocalyptic period is there's several aspects for why post-apocalyptic and apocalyptic are popular. One aspect is that people who normally in our massive society do not shine have an opportunity to shine. Steve Smith, Faye Smith, they were people who were just going to live a fairly normal life until the apocalypse comes along, and suddenly they become very important because they are people who are well adjusted to that. Another thing is that humans are not designed for mass. Humans are not designed for the world that we live in. We're designed to live in small tribes. And with the apocalyptic and the post-apocalyptic environment, we're broken back down to small tribes. And people, it's one of the reasons that they're very popular genres, because you can relate to being in a small tribe, whereas it's much more difficult to relate to being in a city. And while people prefer cities in general, people prefer the amenities associated with it. There is, as is been discussed in sociology for centuries, an enemy to being in the city. It's a lack of connection to other people, a lack of effective connection to other people. That's why certain groups will form communities. So you have things like Little Italy, Little Korea, Chinatown. It's so that the tribe can be together, and those are ethnic examples, but they do generally fall along ethnic lines. Just that's how humanity does stuff.
But it's also your building, your block.
Your building, your block, your neighborhood,
yeah.
And people form these communities because we're designed to be around about 150 people. That there was a recent study on that. Is that 150 is the primary unit.
And I think I'm looking forward to seeing what Mike Williamson does with the expansion of his short story about a leader who rises, the king of Floribama, Cuba. And, yeah. A reluctant ruler. So, and, I think that's part. Like I said, I think that's part of the fun of Black Tide Rising in particular. Is I'm not saying that continual stress is good. I'm just saying that. I'm saying that some stress is going to bring out characteristics in people that they don't get to utilize in our current day. Although that may be changing in 2020.
Well, the thing.
One of my favorite things about that universe and humans excelling under stress or managing that stress is how John introduces and has his characters explain how really dark humor. I'm thinking, for example, of Faith picking up that skull on the beach and using it as a hand puppet. Helps people get through stress. And anybody that's been a soldier or had a cop or a fireman probably can relate to, or in that case, nurses and EMTs. Another good example. Say and make outrageous jokes which would never be printable in what I'll call a mainstream genre novel or short story. In John's universe, not only did he do it, but he gave a lot of other authors a chance to experiment with some of the human truths that come out under stress with that.
There we go. Now Brett gets to turn this into a graphic novel, which is going to be fun.
It is. For everybody, for the girls, what I always was attracted to was that they learned they had talents they didn't really know they had. And they also had to grow into leadership roles. And I thought that was very interesting how that was all handled.
I myself was never in a combat environment. Mike, on the other hand, was. And he and I were discussing at one point, we were actually talking about a bad Bruce Willis movie. But there was a scene where Bruce Willis has just once again escaped absolute certain death. And he comes out of the whole thing, he stops and he just starts laughing and giggling. And I said, I can imagine that being a normal reaction, because a couple of times when I did something just in real life where, I had been under really, really high stress, I came out of it. Once I calmed down, I started giggling. And Mike said he had a situation. Do you remember that conversation, Mike?
I do, but I do remember that, but I don't recall the anecdote. That's happened to me a number of times. There was a situation where I had a live fire contact. This was in East Africa, and myself. In this case, it wasn't other SEALs. There was a Green Beret E8, and there was a Force Recon E6, and myself, and we were. This was the early days in Somalia, and the ROE was much more, I won't say relaxed, but let's say liberally applied. And we'd gone somewhere we probably shouldn't have gone, and we're poking our noses, and we poked our nose into a hornet's nest. And I think it was the staff sergeant, the Marine Corps Force Recon guy, used some demolitions for us to break contact, and it had really, 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 really gruesome results. And we poked our heads back out and saw this extraordinarily gruesome scene, and obviously the threat had been turned off, and we had a giggle fit. We stood there with no fire discipline and had a giggle fit for about 30 seconds, the three of us, and then we DD'd out of there as fast as we possibly could. But I won't forget looking like we didn't think we deserved to be alive, and we were just like giggling, like I imagined how girls, like not just giggling but tittering, like oh shit, and we ran away. But it's a very real reaction to stress, is sort of disbelieving dark humor. And that was an example.
Yeah, that. I have friends in retired special forces and also infantry, and it's the same. And you see that in even things like Generation Kill. which is Evan Wright's book, which is First Recon, First Marines, that blitzkrieg into Baghdad in 2003, I think. It's a great book. He wrote it for Rolling Stone and then published it as a book, and then they turned it into a miniseries for HBO, and it's got a lot of the same Marines in the show playing themselves, or they were on there as technical advisors. So it's very faithful, and there's no way in hell you could get that thing made today. Because just the banter between the Marines, which is verbatim from Evan's notes, it's just insane. I can't repeat any of it here. It's beyond Full Metal Jacket, way beyond Full Metal Jacket, and and even they have the radio, the comms play a big role in Generation Kill, and there's always kind of comms that are sort of like in the background or going on in the foreground, and it's hilarious, the type of crap that even goes on over comms.
I was on guard duty one time in Sinai, and we had these guard towers around the main base. And so, guys would be assigned to sit up in these guard towers. And one night, this guy named Stewart, who was the basis for Stewart in Rosaline Universe, and he was the basis for Dick Julian in March of Country Universe. We're up there and we're just bored to tears because we've been on guard duty for a week, and we're doing this every single night, right? And there's nothing going on, and you're just up there surrounded by a freaking desert and nothing. And he starts reading penthouse letters over the radio, and when he's reading, "Dear Penthouse,
yeah,
I never believed your letters until one day and we are just," because he's breaking the mic because you only talk on the mic for so long. So it's with the correct mic break and everything, and he's just really getting into it, and we are just the nearest other guard tower was about 100 meters away, and I could hear the other guy howling with laughter. He was laughing so hard.
It's a natural reaction, I think.
The funniest people you will ever meet are people who have worked for like 15, 20 years in emergency medicine. Because if you do not have a screamingly horrible black sense of humor, you don't survive more than a year. You get out. You do anything else. You have to have a black sense of humor to work in emergency medicine, and they are hilarious.
Yeah, and this is the problem I have with grimdark fiction, grimdark quote unquote. Yeah, is that it's relentingly, just the bad stuff, and that is just not how humans work. It's not how. That's not how it goes. This is how we deal with the bad stuff.
Walking Dead would be a comedy. Okay, the people in Walking Dead, they would have capped themselves a long time ago if they could not laugh about stuff that no human being can laugh about, right? So Walking Dead really should be done as a comedy. It's just everybody is joking about how horrible it is constantly.
I think a couple of the early seasons before they killed off a couple of the characters had elements of comedy. I'm thinking of the time when the character Glenn needed an engagement ring shopping, so he made a commotion and all the zombies charged the chain link fence so their fingers went through, and he went down the line looking for female zombies that had engagement rings, so he saw the one he wanted and he chopped it off and then brought that to his bride.
That's actually kind of clever.
Yeah.
That was a rare point where a grim comedy to alleviate the otherwise unrelenting bad decisions that those characters made, unlike the characters in the BTR universe.
Well, one thing I'll point out there is that speaking of The Walking Dead and the spinoff, and this actually goes back to a conversation Richard and I had about a year ago. There's a point in the spinoff show where I actually texted Richard one day and just said, "Hey, I think somebody in that writer's room is ripping John off," because they sort of did this turn on a dime where these, one of the big complaints that we've got about Walking Dead, and I think it's perfectly valid in some areas, and maybe people are a little unfair in other areas, is that it's got that kind of cyclical doom porn to it. But at the end of this one particular season in Fear the Walking Dead, you reach a point where these characters all decide that, hey, we're gonna use what's available to us here, and we're gonna carry on the work of these truckers that decided, that had access to warehouses and supplies and knew all the back roads and knew how to get around, that we're going to try to help people. And they decide, hey, we're going to take this up and we're going to go start trying to help everybody we can. And it's very, very John Ringo. And the trucker thing, that was another point I'll give them. That was a very clever way to do that, because it makes perfect sense, and it's grounded in a whole lot more realism than what you see in most of a series like that. And real quick, since I'm thinking about it because I keep forgetting, we are currently at 35,232. That's a really big jump. We're just a fingernail away from crossing 82% on there. So you guys are doing great. Keep doing what you're doing, and let's keep those pre-orders rolling in.
So I have a question for you, Mike, and for Richard and for Brett. And I wish we had Chuck. But so what's the strategy? And this isn't a gotcha question. I really don't know. I kind of know how you would write it in terms of a novel or short story, but how will you communicate the essential and useful humor in the BTR written universe to the visual medium of a graphic novel? How do you do that?
Well, you still have the dialogue that the characters are going to be working with that John wrote. So that'll be one of the things that you do. Chuck perfectly understands how to take things and adapt them across, because now we're going to go from the world of reading something to the world of show me something. So you're going to have to put it together that way, because this really starts to become, it's like putting together a movie, except we're just doing it on a printed page instead.
Well,
there were aspects that I put into there that were visual comedy. And you had to kind of be able to visualize them. But one aspect of that is, and I don't know how much in the graphic novel you're planning on going back from before the last concert in New York, but one visual comedic aspect of it is when they go to the Costco and they buy them completely out of toilet paper and then stack it on top of the car.
Right.
Oh yeah. So I feel confident that some variation of that will survive.
And in the post-COVID environment, right? Yeah. Now that was comedic before. How people would get vicious about that, because now they know just how important that is, right? So you've got this Nissan Pathfinder driving down the road that's got toilet paper basically falling out from under the tarp as it's driving down the road. So there is some visual comedy that I built into it that I don't know if you guys probably will be able to do that.
Oh, absolutely, you will. You think about the scene where Faith is doing the boarding and she's on the open mic with Sophia, and Sophia's, she's complaining about don't get yourself bit in the ass. That's really easy to play with.
If we ever get to the point that that we can do this as in video mode, right? A television series, that sort of thing, which is the graphic novel. I'll be honest, I was kind of like, we're going to be doing a graphic novel. Okay. And then I saw the artwork, Brett, and I loved the artwork. And I was like, okay, these guys actually got it. Okay. And now I'm really stoked to see the graphic novel. But one of the purposes of the graphic novel is to create a storyboard to be
right
into, a media thing. One of the things, who do you cast for this? Who do you cast for that? One of the things for Faith is it's going to need to be a girl that, going to need to be a young actress who can do physical comedy. Because Faith does a lot of physical comic things. It's not just the boarding scene. It's all sorts of stuff. I mean, Mike was talking about where she picks up the skull and she's like, this isn't so good, Mon. Because she's very, very black comic. And even where they're boarding the Iwo Jima, she's doing stuff while she is fighting zombies. She's doing stuff as a joke. She's joking around with it as she's doing it. So you have to have somebody who can do physical comedy, can do comedy, and also can do gun comedy. Nobody does gun comedy.
John, wasn't Faith doing a takeoff on Shakespeare? Alas, poor York, we hardly knew him.
Right.
In the event that the adaptation for the graphic novel incorporates anything in book 5, the first book that in which John invited me to collaborate, the scene where then private, but shortly thereafter, Specialist Astroga has her encounter with the brigadier general that failed his sand check, blew a sanity roll, and he's looking for a piece of string, but he won't talk to a non-NCO. So she promotes her boss from from sergeant to staff sergeant. Was it, John? I think you're muted, John.
Yep. Yeah, you're muted, John.
Specialist to sergeant.
That's it. So in any event, and then at that point, he'll speak to the same soldier who just got promoted. Yeah, from the promotion orders he just signed. That lends itself well, I think, as long as the change in the ranks is made explicit.
Yeah, one of the things I see a couple folks bringing up in the chat, it's actually is a really good point. When it goes to some of these sort of things that a writer of John's skill level and his own experience in the military, the way that he's able to kind of color the world and kind of show you these little things that sort of paint that picture. There probably will be a few areas where we have to maybe slightly modify those or maybe leave a few things out just because they don't translate well to visual and they might kind of come across the wrong way to a different audience. One with Sophia on the boat being kind of an example of that. Like we get it in the military, some other people may not necessarily. And one of the things we're staying very faithful to the spirit of everything, as Chuck Dixon has repeatedly kind of emphasized in the streams he's been on. Things may happen in a slightly different order. You may say little variations here and there, but all the characters are the same characters that you know and love from that series. The girls are going to be slightly older. They're still going to be in their kind of general age range that you're familiar with them there, but they're going to be a couple of years older, and there will probably be some things like the sunbathing on the boat there that maybe don't make the cut, just for that reason. Not in book form they work because they're part of that, because they're part of this whole picture that you're painting. But when you're doing it in a few short pages of a graphic novel, it doesn't really translate properly the way that it does when John writes it.
And if you've ever seen how comic book artists draw women in bikini tops, I don't think we want to do that to the girls.
Why not? Guys, I hate to tell you this. Let me back up a little bit. When I got the idea for Ghost, I called it the wanker piece. I said it was the worst thing that I had ever written. I said this was crap piled on crap. I'm posting about it on Facebook or Dane's Bar. I can't remember which. And people were like,
It was the bar.
It was the bar, right? And people were like, oh, we've got to see what your bad stuff is like. So I posted like 6,000 words and went to Dragon Con. And almost immediately was like, we've got to see the rest of it. And I hated, right? I did not want to publish it under my name. I tried to talk Jim to letting me use a pseudonym. He wouldn't let me. John D. Ringo instead of John Ringo, anything to distinguish it. And I knew that this thing was just going to be awful. Ghost was my best-selling series. If I could have written one of those books a year and had the sales just stay at where A Deeper Blue was, and if I hadn't screwed up my taxes, I would own an island, okay? I would own an island. Do the girls in bikinis, okay? If they're 19 and 17, do the girls in bikinis. Okay.
I'm going to second that, and the reason why is because they are women, okay, and the fact that the men that they lead see them as women is important. That the emotions that it brings up for the guys that they are with, it's important. Showing how the Marines protect them while they are sunbathing is important. It's a hugely important plot point in that book. Now, I'm not going to tell the comics guys how to do their business. That's their business. But And what they choose to show is what they choose to show.
The explicit
But-
sex
but-
can be left out, definitely.
Yeah.
The sexually explicit stuff can be left out, definitely. But I was getting the impression that it's like, you're not going to show the girls sunbathing. And it's like, maybe not sunbathing topless. I can understand that.
Right. Yeah. You wouldn't do that,
But you know, I would 100% support the girls in bikinis. And yes, the girls
absolutely.
are based on my daughters. The girls are based on my daughters, but both of my daughters would support them being topless, or not topless, but in bikinis.
in bikinis and looking good. I mean, that's yeah. So, like I said, I'm not gonna tell Brett and Chuck and these guys how to do their job, but there was a reason why it was in the books.
Yeah, well, one of the things I have to preface on that is that we're going to be deferring heavily to Chuck's guidance on a lot of that, just because he's done this so much and he's so skilled with it. And it's not necessarily that something like that would be totally cut out of anything, just that we might have to approach it from a slightly different angle.
Yeah, understood.
There's a scene in book 2 where Faith is just cleaned up from a mission. She's wearing a pair of short shorts and a t-shirt. You know, she just got clean. She goes in the main eating cafeteria area of the big boat. I forget what it's called. And a fresh caught former Hollywood business executive, cough, cough, Weinstein, cough, cough, makes the mistake of grabbing her by the ass, and she puts him in a hammerlock and about dislocates his shoulder because he had radically failed to understand what all of her Marines had come to learn, which was that she was not just physically lethal, but she was mentally switched on, regardless of whatever she's wearing. And that was a real aha moment for anybody that was reading the books, if they hadn't figured out already that she was a bit different from the average teenager, male or female teenager.
And the thing is, you know, that is a completely understandable and normal reaction for somebody who has been on the point of the spear, right? I mean, this is, I don't know how many stories that I've heard, but certainly my boyfriend has told stories that are similar. You know, they come back from a mission, all they want to do is just wind down, they're on base, and somebody tells them that their uniform isn't quite right. And that person ends up in a hospital, and they should. You know? So,
in jail from Vietnam, guy had just come back, and this was crossing over to Cambodia, and he comes back, and he's just gotten back into uniform, just cleaned up, and he's walking over to the mess hall, and he walks past a brand new second lieutenant, and the second lieutenant braces him up and tells him that he didn't give him a salute. And so the guy salutes him. Well, they had a sniper that was coming up and firing at the base, like it was like 5 o'clock Charlie in MASH. Right, guy would come up always at the same time, fire at the base, would never hit anybody. So the next time that the sniper turned up at a sniper point, there was this guy in black pajamas that spoke fluent Vietnamese, that looked kind of Vietnamese, who said, "Hey, next week when you show, or tomorrow when you show up here, there's going to be the second lieutenant walking through this area, or there's going to be a guy walking through this area. When he gets a salute, shoot him." And the next day, he walked right past that second lieutenant, saluted him, bam, lieutenant's down. That was a real story. So you do not mess around with the people who are out on the point of the spear. They will do bad things to you if you do.
yeah, and again, this is part of what Black Tide Rising is talking about, right? What the toll that this takes, what it takes on people, and why it is that we have civilization. That civilization is worth rebuilding because of the cost of it. You know, and I think that these messages are why Black Tide Rising Universe has appealed to so many different writers.
Yeah, exactly. And to the audiences.
Oh yeah, well, so like I said, I'm looking forward to seeing it translated into graphic novel form.
It'll be fun.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
And Mike, to answer your question, there'll be quite a bit of book 5 that you're going to see that's going to get used because you and John spent so much time writing that book, giving so much more information that's really graphically great that we really want to pull a lot of that forward into it and sort of combine it with the first book.
Oh, absolutely. One of the ways that we've in our sort of early discussions of that after Valley of Shadows and River of Night kind of made their way out into the universe, we in a lot of ways, and of course this is also one of these things that's going to be heavily dependent on kind of Chuck's on how Chuck sees it sort of incorporating, sort of playing out, is that we see it really almost as kind of if you're looking at it from episodic television. I'll use Game of Thrones just as a cheap, easy example because it's a series that sort of jumps from one set of characters to another in sort of an ABC story style. We really kind of see that as, we see the Faith, Sophia, Steve, and Stacy as the A story and Tom's crew as the B story, where you're able to sort of make some of those jumps back and forth and not have people looking in the same direction for too long at any one given time. And particularly with when you're talking about New York and you're talking about that kind of setup for the fall and this whole situation with the bank and the gangs and the government and the cops, all of that stuff, that gets into areas that's right in Chuck's wheelhouse.
Mm-hmm.
As, Chuck wrote The Punisher for a long time. He's one of the best. He's one of the most beloved writers on that series, and that sort of feeling, that kind of Gangs of New York style kind of wheeling and dealing and kind of intrigue. I mean, that really gets into an area where Chuck shines, and we want to make the most out of that.
Glad to hear it. John and I put a lot of effort into thinking through the specifics of what would happen on the island of Manhattan and immediately thereafter. And I put some real world skull sweat into, okay, I put myself in the position of Tom Smith and thought about, the pressures he was under and to what extent he was given freedom to spend money and act, and then turn that into the outline of a real world plan for this kind of event, and never expecting that a few years later we would have a COVID-19 event, and all those banks with which I was familiar activated their remote trading floor operations and distributed their people socially, and for real had sterilization and hand washing stations set up every few feet in the floor, and all those things came true. There were preparations for them, but they'd never been exercised as completely. So it was a real kind of aha moment, because the delay between writing and publishing and the book actually coming out on Amazon and in the bookstores and Barnes and Noble, et cetera, coincided not that long ago. The last book came out, River of Night, and we had COVID-19 hit in really hard beginning in March of 19, no, March of 20, sorry. So it was definitely coincident, and it was a bit eerie to see happening in real life, the early stages, what happened in the book.
No causal relationship whatsoever. No causal relationship at all. None.
Yeah.
It's a completely different book. It's a completely different universe, but I don't know how many people have referenced Last Centurion.
Right. Yeah, I'm actually pitching that one to a YouTuber buddy of mine. In fact, Nick Ricada that had Chuck and Brett on. I want to try to bring you on with him sometime, John, because I was telling him, like, hey, this is a guy you could argue predicted a whole lot of 2020.
I don't do Twitter a lot, and I've gotten completely off Facebook. I've still got a Facebook page, but I'm never on there. I don't do a lot of social media, but like the other day, somebody was referencing it on Twitter, and I went, this period is period, not period, my period, fault, period. This is not my fault, okay? Just because I came up with something fairly similar, no fault. It's also not Dean Koontz's fault, because Dean Koontz actually wrote a book in it was a flu that wiped out the world that came from Wuhan, China. So if it's anybody's fault, it's Dean, not me.
Yeah, and it was. I don't think that was Dean. I think that was Sylvia Brown, who actually the psychic who in the late 80s, early 90s predicted that there would be a flu at some point in time that would come from Wuhan, from China, that would ravage America. Dean picked up on that, and I think put that into the book. I think that's where that came from. But she predicted the same thing, which is Weird.
You know, my friends got really mad with me while this has been going on for the last 6 or 7 months. They go, you just don't take this serious. Why are you so blasé about it? I said, I've been living in this world for the last 4 or 5 years. I said, what do you want me to tell you? And then I had just finished reading The Last Centurion, and so I was going, oh, okay.
So one of my favorite science fiction conventions is Dragon Con, which got canceled this year, unfortunately. And when they finally decided that it was canceled and they sent out the email, I emailed back to the chairman or the head of guest relations, Rachel Reeves, and I said, "But I'm all prepared. I've got my gas mask and my Tyvek suit, my rubber gloves. I was ready. Come on." That's how I was planning on going to Dragon Con. The Tyvek suit, that's the white suit with the hood and everything, the gas mask and the rubber gloves, and just go around with little injectors and a fake taser, right? I'm ready.
I wanted to go to the surplus store and buy a mop suit and just wear that.
Well, I mean, the mask requirement wouldn't have been onerous at Dragon Con, but
Well, everybody said that it was virtually guaranteed that the big costume at Dragon Con was going to be Plague Doctor. Everybody was going to be dressed as Plague Doctor.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, there. Although there have been some real interesting gotcha moments in the COVID-19 experience, I continue to think. I feel the same way as Faith did in the very first book 1, when she goes ashore and she says, "That's it. Where are the howling mobs of zombies? Where's the gunfire in the distance? Where's the booming artillery? Where's the buildings collapsing in flames?" And we've gotten all the way up to that, and then our social response has gone past that. Some of the unhelpful levels of early hysteria were particularly dismaying, as we're not at that point. And one of the things that we didn't take into account in the book, John, is we really didn't talk a lot about either social media or the pandemic, which was much faster moving and lethal in the book, was going to be addressed politically.
Yeah, I mean, I can go back and in retrospect, if I wrote another plague book post COVID-19, there would be a lot of differences to it. One of the things with the social media aspect is that remember 2012 and social media hadn't become quite as dominant as it is now. We didn't have some of the stuff that just came from the 2016 election associated with it. And I would not have anticipated. Yeah, I have.
One of our readers on stream is George Avery, is saying that you actually did address it.
So one of the aspects that I had not expected was how thoroughly everybody would quarantine, because I had it as New York would just continue. In the books, there's actually multiple scenes where the primary characters are talking about how they just ignore what's going on, and it's like, well, they're New Yorkers, they do that. As it turned out, no, New Yorkers go and hide in their bunkers. They shut down completely, and so I had not anticipated that sort of response.
The thing is, I don't think you get that availability. I don't think you get that ability to hunker down until you get where we are now with high-speed internet. Because if you don't have video conferencing, you don't get this apocalypse. And we didn't when Black Tide Rising started. So, yeah.
That's a good point, Tony. When I think about the early urban response and sort of insouciance to the perils of the pandemic in, say, February and March, there wasn't anything like the concern there is now.
Well, one of the things, it's not just that we've got the teleconferencing, we've got all of that. We've got delivery, everything.
Right.
we have teleconferencing, we have the high-speed internet, all of that. Now, there's not a huge change between 2012 and 2020 in that, but there is a change.
Mm-hmm.
So, it to a certain extent that might have been more the response in 2012. But if I ever do write another that has to do with a plague, there will be a lot more of the COVID effect of it. But one of the things about COVID is this isn't a plague; it's a bad cold, people.
Well, that is the other thing, is that this is an election year, right? And the how quickly this turned from a public health issue to a political issue is
Right.
creepy.
One of the things that if I wrote Black Tide post COVID, I think instead of the vaccine being made from the spines of higher order primates, there would be a very simple drug which had been around for 70 years that was well known what its effects were and what its dosage level was. And if you just took this drug, you didn't become a zombie. And if you just took one pill a day, you didn't become a zombie. But because a very divisive, or at least a very controversial president promoted the drug, everybody who didn't like the president refused to take it. So they were the only ones who became zombies.
Well, that's a big problem solver.
Yeah, but yeah, the extent, and I think, again, this is a change between 2012 to 2020. The extent of the knee-jerk reaction of compliance with these rules is, again, creepy and scary. You expected New Yorkers to say, "Man, we're just going to be. This is crazy. I'm looking around. I see this is bullshit," and instead they just left. And you expect people to keep their businesses open, and they didn't. And that's like I say, that when you write the next post-apocalypse, when John Ringo kills off 90% of the human race in some form or fashion, and we go from there, that
Again.
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 Change is funny. We have had a lot of change since 2012. I'm a pilot, so if I took off from LA and was flying to New York and I was 2 degrees off on my heading, by the time I got to where the East Coast is, I'd probably be a little bit south of Washington, D.C., or closer to Baltimore. So it doesn't take a lot to kind of get you, to move and be off target like that.
Yeah. There was a point you were making, and never mind. Somebody else is going to have to talk because I just lost it.
Well, I think that's going to be a challenge, actually, for the graphic novel comic book guys, is taking things that we assumed in 2012, and now that we are seeing sort of our test run for the apocalypse this year, now that we're seeing how people actually do react, you're going to have to, I don't know, maybe there might be some more explaining that you have to do. What do you think, Brett?
I think it'd be interesting to adjust some of the effects, to meet the modern world we live in. Just because things have jumped, especially technology's jumped so far since 2012. So you kind of have to. I mean, I don't think that really puts a huge change in the subject matter or the storyline, really. But I think it would be interesting to kind of update it and make it modern. And that way people are getting something that's not only familiar, but also fresh and a little bit different. And that kind of gives it sort of a different edge in a lot of ways. So I think, I don't want to, like Chuck has talked about in the past, I don't want to stray from source material, because that's ultimately what people want. They want to see it adapted into a new medium. They want the familiarity, but at the same time, since we just kind of had a dry run at this to a degree, it would be sort of interesting to kind of update it with, with kind of some of the current things that have been going on.
Hey, Rand, that's a great question. And Yes, we're offering several options for John to sign right now. The new tier that we added, that the $60 tier that has the basic graphic novel plus John autographing the cover-sized art print that's included with that. We have that. If you've already purchased a basic graphic novel, don't worry, because you can, for what adds up to the same amount of money, you can upgrade to that signed print. And also for the deluxe autograph books going up, that's the 250 level, going all the way up to the folks who bought the limited signed Dave Dorman prints and anything where someone was drawn in. If you would like John to autograph those, get with us. We will absolutely make that happen.
We want to give John writer's cramp.
Oh, I mean, there's going to be a couple of hundred of these. I don't mind a couple hundred. A few thousand occasionally gets a little bit. But it won't be John who will making it happen. It will be my PA who will make it happen, because if I didn't have a PA, it would not happen.
And we're thankful for the PA too.
But yeah, we're talking about the change in technologies, and one of the hugest changes in technology. I talked way back towards the beginning about could you bring the internet back, and in terms of what we're doing here, we actually did that sort of thing in the books. That technology was there, but it was only for a fairly advanced system. One of the biggest changes that would occur hello again, kitty cat. One of the biggest changes that would occur moving forward is Starlink. Elon Musk.
Sure.
Okay, if you have Starlink up and operating, and by the way, Starlink would be up and operating, and I'm not going to get into why, but it would be. I was kind of sitting there going, I'm not too sure that Starlink's going to be operating. It is. But if you have that, each one of those, again, is a tiny little server.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be like 6,000 of them. So you would have a pretty effective internet capability just off of Starlink.
Mm-hmm.
So where an apocalypse occurs and what the type of apocalypse is in terms of the advances of technology is going to affect things a lot. One of the things that I looked at going forward, and from the point of view of We Shall Rise and how you bring things back, problem that I saw was bringing back telephone. And people are like, well, how hard would that be? With modern technology, telephone, incredibly hard.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that, I was thinking about bringing back telephone in Jacksonville. Okay, how hard would it be to bring back telephone in Jacksonville? Incredibly hard, because as it turns out, Jacksonville no longer has any copper wire telephone at all. It's all fiber optic. And once the technologies to use the fiber optics start to break down, you can't replace them anytime soon. So what you've got to do is you've got to rewire the entire town. Telephone in and of itself, the basic concept of telephone is not very hard. Doing it anywhere near modern technology, even like the old-fashioned rotary dial phone, is difficult.
It's because we're in a digital world. We don't live in an analog world, and that's all analog technology.
Yeah,
and most of it's gone. I mean, even my meter is a smart meter, and it's all digital. It pings every 30 seconds and sends information off to my electric company. And the old ones were rotary. They were analog. They were gears that would sit there and turn, and then the guy would have to come out and read it. Now they can all do that back at some HQ, and you eliminate a bunch of jobs. I guess it's part of automation, but none of that analog stuff really even exists anymore, other than like audio files, like musicians and guys who are really into vinyl buy all of that old analog stuff with the tubes because it sounds better. than the digital stuff.
And it does. Something you would think about doing possibly would be, what primitive technology would you maybe have to go back to that you could use in place of the digital technology that had failed?
Well, that was one of the things that I was looking at. And the truth is that society would have been able to rebuild much more easily in the 1980s. And it's actually 1988 is like the last year where there were technologies that were comprehensible and rebuildable. One of the things about that is tractors. The 88 series John Deere tractor is incredibly popular, even with very, very advanced farmers. And the reason is it's the last year that a farmer can work on the tractor themselves.
Right.
Everything after that, you require a specialized mechanic, and the modern ones are just incredibly complicated. So even bringing back agriculture will be at any sort of industrial level will be very difficult, because unless you can find those pre-chip tractors to plow the fields, your tractors just aren't going to work.
Right.
And there's no way to get around. There's no way to get past it. Cuba has proven that you can keep a 1950s car going for 100 years. Okay. You can keep the B-52 going until we've got hyperdrive. Okay. But an F-22 has got a definite shelf life, and then it's dead. So, really modern technology is very hard to replicate.
It is.
100% agree, John. And I'm going to add a bit more and suggest, well, I'll flatly state, a certain amount of that complexity is by design to increase a proprietary barrier that prevents farmers from exiting a particular brand of tractor or trailer so that they're locked in for life. That's the purpose. There's a right to repair legislation bill that's I think it's either in 15 or 20, even 25 states now, to fight that. And that it's one of those big issues we should be thinking about, because it extends in every part of our lives, whether it's our cell phone, our PC, our smart TV, our kitchen appliances, our cars. And instead we're talking about how many scoops of ice cream the president had for dessert. But yeah, sorry, rant over.
3 scoops.
I'm not that into ice cream, so yeah, the super advanced technology that we're starting to get into now is it's impossible to replicate in an apocalyptic environment. There's certain things that you're going to be able to use until they break down. But after that point, you're going to have started to go back to stuff which is replicable with the technology that you have available. So, for example, again, trying to just get landline telephone, forget smartphones, forget anything along those lines. Landline telephone into Jacksonville. Okay, well, you're just going to have to rewire. Where's the wire come from? You're going to have switching. Where does the switching come from? Who makes the switches? The switches don't exist anymore. Okay, well, for the time being, can we use these digital switches? No, we can't, because we're going to have to use analog. Can we figure out some way to get the digital ones to work until we can get the analog ones to work? It's all at risk. In a post-apocalyptic environment, in our current situation, rebuilding would be really, really tough, because we don't have the stuff that's easy to rebuild. And it's one of the things that got me. I started to write a story for We Shall Rise, and then I realized that what I was going to write wasn't possible. And when the person said, let's bring back the internet, and I looked at it in 2012 technology, and I went, I don't think you can do that. Can you get Can you get internet nodes set up? Yes, you can, but getting it down to people, you would be back at 1978 internet, where it is only connected to specific locations.
Right.
Probably like hook libraries up to the internet, but getting it down to an individual's home, unless they have some specialized capabilities, it's just not going to happen.
That's why we go back to radio, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. But even radio primarily uses digital technology now. So if you've got a ham radio, it's all chips, and it's all really refined chips. So once that breaks down, what do? Once all of those are gone, what do?
They called me a hoarder. No.
Exactly. You don't. The old time ham operators, they don't throw the old toot stuff away. It's all sitting on the floor somewhere, and that's what you pull out.
Yeah. I read a book a few years ago called Crystal Clear about communications in World War II. And if you want, there were a lot of things that went on in World War II that I looked at as, oh, well, this was just complete screw up. And having read Crystal Clear, I now understand why it's screwed up and how it's screwed up, including things like mostly stuff from Airborne, why the first airborne operation into North Africa was such a complete and total disaster. There were a lot of reasons, but the fact that they had very, very poor communication systems was one of them.
Right.
But it gave me a real insight into just what you'd have to go back to. You'd have to go back almost to World War II communications and then slowly move your way back up. You'd know, the difference is you'd know what the path is this time.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But you'd have to go all the way back to crystals and then move forward. And you've got a fraction of the population that you had. So, in even with COVID, people are talking about supply chain. And, when the majority of your population is just flat gone, your people who know how everything works are either nutso violent zombies or are dead. Where do you start? How do you start moving forward? How far back do you have to go? Do you have to go all the way back to a mule and a plow and then start moving your way forward? Nobody's going to want to go back that far. Everyone's going to be trying to find someplace else to stop. And, this is as far as we fall. And in some cases, I think you're going to fall pretty far and then have to work your way back up. I'm getting all sorts of these little things down the bottom as I'm talking. I'm trying to.
It's like trying to chew gum and walk at the same time.
Yeah.
Well, John, didn't you talk a lot about how it would be somewhat self-organizing? And there's a bit of a point where Steve Smith talks about how in this intermediate period, the black market and the gray market have an important role to play in optimizing the distribution of recovered resources.
Steve Smith is actually a huge fan of black market and gray market in that situation, as long as you are not directly stealing from someone else or you are not taking something which is critical in some other place. Because you can't organize it. You can't organize it because trying to do top-down organization in any situation is pretty tough unless you've already got everything there. Top-down organization on an aircraft carrier, when you have the whole supply chain, is an absolute necessity. You have to have top-down organization on an aircraft carrier. Top-down organization in anything more complicated than an aircraft carrier is a really bad idea. Because that is about the maximum complexity that you can define every single action of every single person, every single moment. Once you get above that, your complexity gets too high.
Right.
And so you have to have a certain amount of acceptance of wheeling dealing. And when you start talking about a whole society, you especially have to do it. Mike, you talked about here in the COVID situation that the government is going to decide what is a priority and what is not a priority. And then little did they know that with everyone locked down, all sorts of people were going to want to bake. And one of the things that they did not consider a priority was the single factory in the United States that makes baker's yeast. And that was shut down. So all the grocery stores ran out of baker's yeast. And it's like, how can we run out of baker's yeast? Well, one, the demand increased, and two, the government decided that a baker's yeast factory was not a priority.
Right.
So in the post-fall situation, there are certain things that you're going to have to say, yes, we have to do this. One of them that I realized was a really high priority when I was starting to think about trying to do a book beyond that would involve Faith and Sophia, and well, it would involve Faith and Sophia because Steve would be very much in the background. Was infrastructure and big infrastructure, dams, levees, all the stuff that the Army Corps of Engineers does. And I started to try to build a book around that. I knew it was hugely important, and I couldn't figure out how to make it interesting. Because it was a rush to save things like, when I first envisioned a book with Faith and Sophia, they were going to be going up the Mississippi, but the levee for the Appalachia Bayou had failed. And so they were going to have to cut their way up the Appalachia Bayou. What the hell is that, right? Has anybody on this, Mike, do you know what the Appalachia is?
Well, yeah, but I've got an unfair advantage. I used to live in New Orleans, John.
Okay. Anybody else know what the Appalachia Bayou is? No. Okay. Here's the deal. The Mississippi is 50 feet above its natural level when it passes New Orleans. Okay. It's actually it's held 50 feet up in the air by the Army Corps of Engineers. And where it is, the natural flow, Atlas, right? The natural flow for it is through what's called the Appalachia Bayou. And there is a discharge point right at the top of the bayou. When the Mississippi gets too high, they discharge it into the Appalachia Bayou. The problem is that if we ever had zombie apocalypse, everything breaks down, total end of the world, etc., the Mississippi will eventually breach the levees, and it will flow into this bayou,
right,
which doesn't go anywhere near New Orleans. And there are 5 major bridges over it. And the problem is all those bridges are below the natural water level. So you would have bridges that would still be there, but they'd be underwater because they're really, the I-20 and the I-10 bridges are really tough. So you've got these underwater obstructions, which would be in the current day extremely difficult to remove. And can you imagine trying to do that with, what you had at the end of the last one, Strands of Sorrow? Can you imagine, at the end of Strands of Sorrow, oh my God, we've got Jacksonville sort of up, and we've got Guantanamo Bay, and the submarines are the submariners are starting to help. And you've got to go up this relatively shallow bayou and remove bridges from underwater in high current.
We had that extra nuke. There was an extra nuke, wasn't there? Extra nuke.
You mean just nuke them?
John, I'm one of the people that thinks that there's so many cool stories left to tell. Your comment about the infrastructure, the Atchafalaya bypass to the Mississippi, is an excellent example. But back in 2012, 2013, we were still very dependent on liquid petroleum. And a big part of New Orleans, the local offshore production, or the Loop, produced, I'm going to make this number up, on the order of a third of the refined petroleum at the time in the U.S. came from infrastructure within 20 miles of that city. If you lose the New Orleans basin and delta, it affects, it's huge. And the people you would need to rebuild, I'd say 9/10 of them are probably dead, right? And institutional knowledge is lost. So that there is an interesting struggle to relearn stuff that we would have to go through as a civilization to resurrect that kind of energy intensive economy, I think.
Yeah, fuel is going to, everything in the aftermath is going to be a huge deal. And we're starting to realize that with COVID, because, people talk about supply chain. One of the things that nobody's talking about right now you were talking about, they're worried about scoops of ice cream. They're worried about, Donald Trump walks out onto a balcony and takes off his mask. Everybody's freaking out. Next year, we're going to have famine because COVID hit right at planting time. We've got huge lack of food resource outside of the United States, and normally that is taken up by the United States. The United States would be the fallback, but the United States planting got interfered with. So we are going to have, in spring and in summer, the big thing is going to be places like, forget Somalia having starvation. Places like Kenya, India, Thailand are going to be facing famine, and nobody's talking about it, and it's driving me nuts. So one of the things that's going to happen in the Black Tide universe is eventually the stored food's going to run out, and agriculture is something that most people don't do. And the reason that most people don't do agriculture is because it's really, really hard and it sucks. I mean, even modern industrial farming is a lot of very, very hard day in, day out, highly stressful work. One of the highest rates of suicide in the United States is not vets, it's farmers. Farmers commit suicide all the time because you're having to make decisions now that are going to affect you 2 years down the road. And if you make the wrong decision, you're going to lose everything, and your family's going to be kicked off, and you're going to end. So farming is very, very stressful. Brett, you haven't said anything in a while. Do you have any input here?
Farming is a crapshoot. That's what it is. I mean, it's a literal crapshoot every year. I don't care what you're growing. I remember Bloomberg not too long ago where he's like, "Oh yeah, anybody can farm. You just throw some seeds in the ground and pour some water on top of it, and
Right.
and food comes out." It's just like, no, that's not. I mean, even if you're dealing in grapes, which is I think the highest yielding horticulture, or medical marijuana, frankly, any kind of high yielding horticulture, it's really hard. Whether you're doing indoor or outdoor growing, hydroponics or soil, that is, you just never know what's going to happen. So you could have a really great crop, and then all of a sudden a bunch of mites come in and destroy everything. So
Well, to John's point, a lot of our produce comes from outside the country, and I don't mean Mexico. I mean South America, and it comes from Australia. It comes from other parts of the world, and I don't know what those people did when it all hit them, but I have to figure it couldn't have been much better than we did.
Yeah, Sweden's going to be, basically the only civilization left that's thriving. They're back to where we were prior to all of this at this point. I mean, they're fully reopened. They have no second wave. I don't know what this is all about. God bless Elon Musk. He came out the other day and said he's not going to take Bill Gates's vaccine, and then he called Bill Gates a knucklehead. And then they were talking about how 200,000 people have died of COVID, and he just looked at these reporters and he just said, "Everyone dies," and I was just like, I love this guy. He's a typical kind of cynical Gen Xer, and he sees the world for what it is. Everybody's going to die. You break down these numbers of 200,000, and only 6% of it, I think, is actually just COVID. The rest of it's all multiple comorbidities, and over 50% of that, 96%, is elderly people who are close to dying. So it just kind of baffles me, even at this point, how people are can't see the forest from the trees when it comes to COVID. The whole thing is annoying because I'd like to get back to normal. My hometown in Scottsdale, Arizona, just lifted their mask mandate. So I mean, people are finally starting to get sick of this stuff, and I think but the damage it's done as far as businesses, restaurants. We have yet to really see that kind of hasn't hit, just like the food stuff hasn't hit yet.
Well, I think you're right, Brett, and I think that reality is starting to sort of set in, and I think we're going to get a situation about a year from now, very much like we did when the Berlin Wall fell. And before the Berlin Wall fell, there was just a few crazy maniacs who said we have to fight against the Soviets, we have to fight against communism, we have to push back, and we need to spend the money, and we need to spend the propaganda, and we need to talk about how America is different. And a vast part of the United States said, no, they're crazy. The Russians are people too, and what you're doing is a waste of money, and it's a waste of time, and we don't need to be doing that. And then the Berlin Wall fell, and then everybody knew that was what you had to do. Suddenly, with that one thing, everybody was aware. Oh yeah, no, this was the whole strategy all along, and we were always behind it, and this was always the way it was. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I actually lived through that, so yeah, no, that's not how it was. And I think that's what's going to happen with the COVID, because people are not going to admit that they were that fucking stupid. They're not going to admit that they were that crazy, that they would look at reality and go, nope, that's not how it is. And I think that you're going to get that change. So remember this. Remember what you're thinking today. Remember that this was not, in fact, the way that it was. But for their own sanity, that's what they're going to have to do.
Yeah, there's too many people invested in the panic. There's like panic pimps. I mean, the media are just pimping panic and fear, and it's just like all I hear about every day is cases, and it's just like, so what? Cases don't mean death. You look at these numbers and these survivability rates. They're largely the exact same numbers they were back in February, and it's like for basically anybody under 78, it's 99.98% survival rate. I realize there's some outliers out there, but I still don't know anybody directly who has caught the Rona, except I was thinking about this the other day. The only person that I have actually shook hands with that I know directly, but I just only met him once, who actually caught the Rona, is the president. So I shook hands with him in a rope line at Trump Hotel last year, and Melania was there, and my buddy Nick Searcy was there, but other than that, I don't know anybody who has caught the Rona. My buddy Chris got sick last week. He caught a cold. They went and got tested negative. He works in DC, so it's just insane. My parents, they don't know anybody.
Well, there was an article, there was a study a while back that pointed out that most people do not know anyone who caught coronavirus or who died from the coronavirus, with the exception of people who live in New York City. In New York City, 50% of them know somebody who died of the coronavirus, and also 25% of them, it was someone close to them. And that's because, I think that Cuomo misread the CDC recommendations and what he was doing, and he won't come out and say, look, I just misread it, and what we did was the wrong thing. But the death rate in New York was so high. And here's the thing, where is all the news media based? New York City. Mm-hmm. So everyone in the news media knows somebody who has died from the coronavirus. And everybody is like, it's wiping us out. It's a plague. It's the Black Death, because they're seeing their reality. I'm not even talking about they're in a bubble. I'm talking about they're seeing their reality.
Sure.
In your reality is the normal reality for the rest of the freaking world. Okay? But it's not the reality in New York City, and therefore it is not the reality of the news media. And panic does sell, it's a business. But it's also their reality is that everyone's dying. My mother died of a respiratory infection. When you're very old, something is going to get you. Stroke is one of the top ones. Heart, I won't say which one is top, but heart failure, that's another one. But right up at the top is respiratory infection. That's what kills an awful lot of people once they get above a certain age. My dad died of stroke. My mom died of a respiratory infection. Coronavirus is a respiratory infection. That's it. Now, I will tell you that because of the information I was getting back in January, I was wearing a mask. I was gloved up. I was spraying everything down. I was wiping everything down until we got more effective information, until we got broader based studies. And then it's like, oh shit, this is just a bad cold, man. Yes, it's going to kill old people. It's going to kill people with comorbidities. It is. But in general, it's just a bad cold. And Donald Trump is the proof of that. He got it. He went to the hospital. He's out 2 days later going, it wasn't that bad.
Well, to put it into context, John, in the Black Tide universe, from month 0 to the fall of New York was 5 months. In our context, that would have been, depending upon where you decide that the plague really started, or the pandemic began, or the virus began to spread outside Wuhan, that probably means the fall of New York would have been the equivalent of, say, April, May, and here we are in October. So we're seeing people's reactions and media reactions that fall outside the scope of the story that you created and that we all worked on. And I wonder if there's a way in the graphic novel to extend any of that to is commentary appropriate or possible on the current situation in the context of a story that was written to have happened in 2013.
I think anything's possible like that with a team as skilled as we've got, especially with a writer like Chuck that just really has a mastery of sort of making those kind of things work.
Well, I don't get a vote, but I respectfully suggest that one of the things that made the series so great and is that there was a certain degree of escapist fantasy in it, and what if in it, and it wasn't. I tell you what, as grim as things were in John's universe, they weren't nearly as grim as the way that some of our media paints the future for the different impacts that this disease has had in us globally. So I don't know. I'm of two minds about that. I'll shut up now. Go ahead.
Well, no, if you ever look at the trailer that we did, Mike, you'll see how we dealt with the media early on in it. That's why I had my friend sort of do it the way he did it. And then we garbled it at the end, like, they all got killed off just like they should have. And then we just went into the story. And you're exactly right. It has to be that escapist. You know what it is. We don't need to repeat and tell them about the pandemic. They're already living it. So yeah, and it was what you guys were talking about early on, which is the way John wrote the characters to the girls are funny. The people are doing what they're doing. So it's not the Marx Brothers. It's not meant to be that, but it is meant to be funny. And that's the part of the story that'll be fun to work with. And hopefully people will read it. And by the time we get ready to release the first graphic novel, I think enough people, like John was saying a minute ago, they'll be on the other side of this to where they'll be able to pick it up, look at it, read it, and go, oh yeah, maybe it wasn't really as bad as we thought it was. And I'm not saying they'll have things to laugh at, but I think they'll have a whole different perspective of it when they look at it on the backside of what we're going through.
I know we're going to start wrapping up soon. Is there time left to ask the people on the stream what if they had to pick one and only one, and death was not an option? Which of John's scenes and all of his body of work in this universe do they want to see visually represented? Whether it's Faith and Decker spinning out in a pile of mushed up zombies, or the Tumba Thumba moment where she's climbing the rail, or what single scene? Ask them what they want.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, we definitely got time for that question. That's a really good one.
Well, I already know my answer, which is the boarding scene.
Yeah, I agree.
Just, if you're gonna really do one scene, it's got to be the boarding scene. But you've also got to have the commentary, because it doesn't work without.
Right.
But again, we were talking earlier about, if we ever get to the point that we can do this as a media, we've got to find an actress who not only can act, but she can also do physical comedy, because Faith does a lot of physical comedy, and she does it intentionally. There's a lot of stuff that's in it that's unintentional, but there's some stuff that Faith actually plays up, because she's somebody who likes attention, and she likes to be the center of attention, and so she plays stuff like that up a lot.
Her getting dogpiled, I think, is just, that's such a great thing. And even in the graphic novel, it'll be something you can deal with and make it look the right way. Go ahead.
I mean, that the boarding scene is pivotal to the character and to the story, but I'd like to offer an additional one that doesn't really play out into sort of and you probably think it's weird because here I am, a hairy-chested frogman advocating for a scene designer dresses. But when Faith finds the Connex box of designer dresses, and they're beginning to dress her down about how could you possibly even consider advertising that, and then they get on the horn to the hole back to the National Command Authority under Offutt Air Force Base, and they get General Bryce on the line, and the first thing she says is, "Oh my God, what brand is there? A size 4 in blue?" The importance of what the dresses represented was pivotal, and of course there was that humor as well.
Well, it goes to Tony's point about how you deal with the girls, and you deal with them as the girls and the women that they become, and absolutely you do that. So she's spot on in the way you think about it. So that's to your point, Mike. And what we'll have to do is
I would say Faith's 16th birthday party has got to be in there too, with her present.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, that's definitely been that was when we were trying to sort of do the calculus for where do the girls need to be age wise, since we're bumping them up just a little bit. Yeah. Trixie is Sweet 16 definitely factors into that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's very visual, right? It's a striking visual image. So that I'd love.
George Avery is voting for the Greens and the Celebutants. People say, where do you get your ideas? And I have absolutely no idea no clue where the idea for the Celebutant section came from. I think at one point I had an idea where that came from, but just all of these Celebutants shoved into a room and having to survive in a zombie apocalypse. And that Emma Watson, that's who the character is Emma Watson, who played Hermione in the Harry Potter books, that she's the one who becomes the designated assassin.
Where's the effect of, I have one job here, do not require my services.
So it's that particular thing. A lot of the stuff that's in those books, people are like, Bob Seger has a song and there's a line in it, what believe in, what believe out, is a big part of any writing. And in the graphic novels, there's a lot of stuff to leave out. Mm-hmm. And in retrospect, if I went back and thought about it, there's a lot of stuff I would have left out of the books. I would have left out a lot of the sex stuff in the books.
Do you guys see Skip Gorman's comment there? It's giving me chills thinking about how you could do that visually.
What?
Imagine looking at you're looking back at New York and you're looking at it from maybe from a slightly elevated position. You're watching blocks of the city go dark, getting closer and closer to the shoreline. And the last thing, the Statue of Liberty winks out, and that's it.
Oh yeah, that's definitely come up in a lot of our conversations about that. In fact, Mike, I've got a little visual piece of kind of logo design I've been working on. I'll share with you that sort of incorporates some of that. I'll get with you later on that. You can see that because that actually drives right at what Skip's comment was and what you brought up with that too.
Well,
All right.
All right, and let's see if we can maybe squeeze in one or two more here. We are going to have to wrap up here in just a little bit. We don't want to overtax everybody, and I think we're going to try to do another one of these before the campaign closes out because it seems like everybody's having a really good time, and it's definitely helping with the backers, and we very much appreciate that. You guys are some of the best fans we could ever work with on something like this. You guys are going to make this happen, and our biggest priority once we hit that funding goal is to make this book the highest quality it can be with the top-notch creative team we have, make it live up to the high quality of John's writing, and to get it out to you guys in a timely manner.
All right. Well, we want to thank everybody for their time on this. It was greatly appreciated. We accomplished a lot of what we wanted to do. And, we got some good ideas, too, of stuff that we're going to talk about here just shortly as soon as we get this funding phase out of the way and we can start to move on to some actual work on the graphic novel itself.
Yeah, certainly, because without naming other franchise names or anything like that, you can, people who are fans of long-standing IPs can sort of look at the past decade or so and see what worked and what didn't based on who came into something saying, hey, we need to respect what came before and build on that and build from it, and the people who came into something and said, well, we're in charge now, we know what we're going to do, and you're going to like it, and it's going to be that way because we're going to tell you that. And we definitely want to be on the other side of that, on the side of knowing what made this universe so special and made it worth undertaking this project and pulling such a great team together to build on the outstanding foundation we've got now. And with that, hey, yeah, I'll add my own thanks to you guys. Keep those pre-orders rolling in. Tell a friend. Some of the big tech shenanigans and censorship has been one of our biggest hurdles to overcome throughout this whole process. And every one of you guys that helps us get the word out is really helping us kind of blast that signal through all the chaff we've got out here and just keep it up. Thank you. And final thoughts, final words, everybody?
John, Mike, Tony, Brett, thanks for your time.
Thanks so much.
All
Appreciate
right.
it. Thanks for everybody.
Hope to do it again soon.
Yep,
All right.
absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
Be in touch. Take care. Have a good night, guys.